There's a machine in your kitchen right now that has been running non-stop since the day you moved in. It never sleeps. It never asks for anything. You open it about 100 times a week, stare into it, decide there's nothing to eat, and close it again. That box is doing something it took human beings 400,000 years to figure out. It's stopping time. Because food doesn't just sit there and wait for you. The second an animal dies, it starts rotting. Bacteria move in within hours. In a warm climate, you've got maybe 2 days before the meat you risked your life for becomes the thing that kills you. So picture yourself 100,000 years ago. You've just brought down an animal that weighs 600 pounds. Your group can eat maybe 40 pounds of it today. The rest, hundreds of pounds of food, weeks of survival, is sitting on a clock. And the clock is loud. That was the real problem in human history. Not finding food, but keeping it. The oldest evidence we have of a human being solving this problem comes from a cave in Israel called Qesem. The site was in use between roughly 420,000 and 200,000 years ago, before our species even existed in its modern form. Taylor and Francis. Researchers analyzed more than 80,000 bones from inside that cave and noticed something strange. Some of them had heavy, aggressive cut marks in the wrong place, on the leg bones, specifically the metapodials, where there is almost no meat and barely any fat. Why would you work that hard to strip a bone that has nothing on it? The answer is brilliant. The skin was dry. Dried skin clings to bone much harder than fresh skin does, which means these bones had been sitting around for a long time before anyone opened them. They weren't stripping meat, they were unwrapping a package. The team, led by Ruth Blasko of Tel Aviv University, working with Ron Barkai, Avi Gopher, and Jordi Rossell, figured out that these humans were deliberately leaving the skin on the bone and using it as a natural seal. The marrow inside stayed edible for up to 9 weeks. Bone marrow is one of the most calorie-dense foods available in nature, and these people worked out that if you leave the wrapper on, you can save it. As Avi Gopher put it, 400,000 years ago, prehistoric humans were already smart enough to know that bones could be preserved under specific conditions and cracked open later when they needed them. Think about what that actually means. Somebody looked at a dead animal and thought about next month. That's not hunger, that's planning. The next move was obvious once you had fire. You hang meat near smoke, and the smoke does 3 jobs at once. It dries the water out, which bacteria need to live, it coats the surface in chemicals that slow decay, and it stinks badly enough that flies stay away. The problem is that we can't put a date on it. Drying racks are made of branches. Smoking huts are made of hide and wood. None of that survives 50,000 years in the ground. We know they did it because every hunter-gatherer society ever documented does it, from the Arctic to the Kalahari, but the evidence rotted along with everything else. Which brings us to a much weirder solution. A paleontologist at the University of Michigan named Daniel Fisher spent decades studying mastodons and noticed a pattern that bothered him. Most of the mastodon remains he was digging up were found at the bottom of what used to be ancient ponds. That's a strange place for a giant animal to end up. Over the next decade, he found a dozen more sites like it across Ohio, Indiana, Michigan, and New York. His theory was that Ice Age hunters weren't losing these animals in ponds. They were using the ponds as refrigerators. So he tested it. He butchered a horse with stone tools and sank it in a pond. When he pulled the meat back out and had it analyzed, no significant pathogens were found. Bacterial counts were comparable to his control samples. Underwater caching turns out to be a simple and effective way to store meat for long periods, Fisher said, arguing it was a common part of how Ice Age hunters got from winter into spring. In some conditions, he claims, the pond does the job better than a modern refrigerator. Here's why it works. Cold water at the bottom of a pond stays just above freezing. There's almost no oxygen down there, and lactic acid bacteria colonize the surface of the meat and lower the pH, locking out everything that would actually make you sick. It's the same principle as a pickle, just with a mastodon. Bradley Lepper, an archaeologist at the Ohio Historical Society, admitted he was skeptical at first, and then said the data dragged him kicking and screaming to the conclusion that Fisher was right. You didn't need a fridge, you needed a lake. If you didn't have a lake, you had dirt. In central Ukraine, a site called Mezhirich dates back about 18,000 years. People there built 4 huge circular structures out of hundreds of mammoth bones and tusks, each between 12 and 24 square meters, using using the bones of roughly 149 individual mammoths in that settlement. Dug into the ground around those bone houses, archaeologists found about 10 large pits, 2 to 3 meters across and up to a meter deep, which are currently interpreted as meat storage. This is the Ice Age. The ground is frozen solid for most of the year, so you dig down into permafrost, drop your mammoth meat in, cover it with bone and rock so wolves and hyenas can't reach it, and you've just built a walk-in freezer that costs nothing and runs forever. These were people surviving winters brutal enough that the only way through was pure ingenuity. A hole in the ground was one of the most powerful pieces of technology on the planet. Now, here's the one that breaks people's brains. In Sweden, at a Mesolithic site called Norja Sunnensund, archaeologists digging ahead of a road construction project found roughly 200,000 fish bones. Then they found what the bones were sitting in, a long pit surrounded by small stake holes, completely packed with them. Adam Boethius of Lund University analyzed the whole thing and concluded that the fish had been fermented on purpose about 9,200 years ago. No salt, small fish layered into a sealed pit where lactic acid bacteria broke the proteins down and preserved them without any of it going bad, wrapped in skins and buried under pine bark to sour in the cold. The fish were mostly roach, caught in autumn during their seasonal migration. They knew the fish showed up at the same time every year. They caught them all at once, and they engineered a way to eat them for months. And here's why that matters. These were foragers. This is thousands of years before farming, before cities, before salt. Boethius argues the scale of it points to semi-sedentism, real technological skill, and a society far more complex than we gave it credit for. You don't build a fermentation pit if you're leaving next week, which leads to the biggest idea in this whole story. At Ohalo 2, a 23,000-year-old camp on the shore of the Sea of Galilee, a drought in 1989 dropped the water level and exposed 6 brush huts with about 55,000 seeds and fruits preserved on a single hut floor, including acorns, a classic storable staple for hunter-gatherers. These people were already thinking in seasons. Around 11,300 years ago, at a site called Dra near the Dead Sea in Jordan, someone built the first real granaries, sophisticated, purpose-built structures for large-scale storage. And here's the part that rewrites the story. Those granaries predate domesticated cereals by about 1,000 years. They built the warehouse before they invented the crop. Watch where the storage goes. At Dra, the granaries sit outside, between the buildings, shared and communal. Starting around 10,500 years ago, storage moves inside the house. By 9,500 years ago, there are dedicated storage rooms. Archaeologists read that shift as the birth of ownership. Food stops belonging to everyone and starts belonging to someone. Fast forward to Tel Tzaf in Israel, around 7,000 years ago, and Professor Danny Rosenberg of the University of Haifa finds silos built for mass storage, plus obsidian, imported pottery, shells, and the earliest metal object in the region. The site was rich because storage is what makes wealth possible in the first place, and where storage got intense, social hierarchy followed. Full barn, full stomach, full year. Whoever controls the barn controls everyone else. So here's the full picture. 400,000 years ago, someone left the skin on a bone and bought themselves 9 weeks. Then we hung meat in smoke and pulled the water out of it. We sank whole animals into freezing ponds and dug freezers into the permafrost. We buried fish in the ground and let bacteria do the work for us. We stockpiled acorns. We built granaries before we built farms. And the day food could outlive the day it was caught, everything else became possible. Villages, surplus, trade, wealth, kings. Civilization isn't built on hunting, it's built on leftovers. And now, you've got a humming white box that keeps a mango from Peru alive on a shelf in your kitchen. You'll open it tonight, look at food that 400,000 years of human problem-solving delivered to you, and say, there's nothing to eat. Every empire you've ever heard of started with somebody staring at more meat than they could eat that day and refusing to let it go to waste. If you want to dig deeper into any of this, all the research is linked in the description.